Hi, you guys. Let's talk about relative pronouns today. Something we've talked about before, but we're going to go back all the way to the basics and I'll talk you through it. We are going to discuss four options today. That's who, which, that, and also leaving out the relative pronoun altogether. However, let's start with having a look at what it is. So what is a relative pronoun? Um, okay, well, sometimes we can combine two short sentences into one bigger sentence. Consider the two short sentences on the right there. Miss Milty is wearing pink trainers. She is a teacher. I could combine those sentences into Miss Milty, who is a teacher, is wearing pink trainers. The bit who is a teacher is what we call a relative clause, and the red word there, who, is a relative pronoun. In Dutch we call dat een betrekkelijke bijzin met een betrekkelijk voornaamwoord hoe. And the relative clause, betrekkelijke bijzin, always gives us extra information about something in the sentence. In this case, who is a teacher gives us extra information about Miss Milty. Well, that's basically the groundwork. Let's go to the different relative pronouns so that you can see what's going on there. Let's start with who. Okay, so we use who at the start of a relative clause when the extra information is about a person. So remember the sentence that we just used. Miss Milty, who is a teacher, really likes me. The extra information about Miss Milty, and yes, I am a person, even though I'm a teacher. So use who to give extra information about me, a person, Miss Milty. By the way, if you would like to take notes in your notebook, you can quite simply press pause down there, write down whatever you need to write down, and taking notes is very clever, and then press play again when you're ready to continue. For now, I'm going to continue with which. So we use which when the extra information in the relative clause is not about a person. For instance, she really likes chocolate. Which is the tastiest treat in the world? The information is the tastiest treat in the world is extra information about chocolate. And chocolate is not a person. So we use which at the start of our relative clause. This also means that you can never have who and which at the start of a relative clause, but we'll get back to that later. For now, let's carry on with that. So, when do we use that? Well, there are relative clauses that have commas around them, and there are relative clauses that don't have commas around them. Why exactly is not so important right now. For now, you just need to see that they are there or not. If there are no commas around a relative clause, then you fill in the word that as an extra option. That can replace who, and it can also replace which. If there are commas around a relative clause, you may not use it. Let's look at some examples. The lady that's always friendly was now really nasty. As you can see, there is some extra information about the lady is always friendly. We could have said the lady who is always friendly was now really nasty. That would have been perfectly fine. But because there are no commas around that bit, we can also say that. The same applies to the other one. The chocolate that I bought yesterday has gone off. The extra information about chocolate I bought yesterday could have been introduced with the relative pronoun which, but because there are no commas around it, we can also use that. Basically, we have two options then. Speaking of options, let's move on to another option, because sometimes, in some cases, we can also leave out the relative pronoun altogether. There we go. So there's no pronoun. We can leave out the pronoun when the relative clause has its own subject, and subject is the English word for onderwerp. So if you see that there's a new subject, then you can also leave it out. That means that there are then three correct options. Now let's have a look at a sentence first. Do you know the girl Tom is talking to? There is some extra information about the girl. It's not just any girl, it's a specific girl that Tom is talking to. We could have said, do you know the girl who Tom is talking to? There's also no comma, so we could also have said, do you know the girl that Tom is talking to? Both of these options are perfectly correct. But because the extra information sentence Tom is talking to has its own subject, heeft een eigen onderwerp, Tom, we can also leave out the relative pronoun. So, do you know the girl Tom is talking to is also a correct option. Now, leaving out the relative pronoun can be a little bit tricky on the test because you might then be tempted to just leave it blank, not to fill out anything at all. That's not very wise because then we think that you didn't answer the question. So if you want to leave out a relative pronoun, there's two things you can do. You can use the symbol that is given right there in the bubble, so the circle with the line through it, or you may use a big X. Both of those, we now then know, okay, this person is opting for the no pronoun option. Okay, it's time to do some practice and put all of this to some good use. How do you do this? Well, if you need to do a kind of exercise with a relative pronoun, then there's basically 3 steps you need to take. First of all, check if the extra information is about a person or not, and then choose who or which. Second of all, check if there is a comma around the extra information. If there is no comma, choose that as well. Lastly, check if there are commas around it. Hey, you already did that. And whether there is a new subject or not. If there are no commas and there is a new subject, you may also leave it out. Okay, so think of those steps while we do this. We practice a little bit. First of all, there are 3 sentences here, and I would like you to fill in the relative pronouns that fit the sentences. You need to write down all options. So sometimes you need even 3 options, and sometimes it's just one of them. I'm going to give you a second to do that. Put me on pause down there, and when you're ready, please press play again. Okay, I'm going to assume that you managed to do your sentences. Let's have a look at the answers then. Okay, so in the first sentence, the children who shouted in the street are not from our school. The children have a relative clause there, shouted in the street, because that specifies which children it was, not just any children, no, the specific children who were shouting. Children are, as you know, people, so we can use who. The bit shouted in the street has no commas around it, so we can also use that. The bit doesn't have its own subject though, so we cannot leave it out. So who and that are our only correct options. In sentence 2, we find ourselves with a relative clause that refers back to car, is driven by Jack. It's extra information about the car. The car is an object, so we can use which for that one. There are commas around this one, so we may not use that. And because there are commas around it and there's no new subject, geen nieuw onderwerp, we can also not leave it out. So the only correct answer here is which. Then let's move on to number 3. What did you do with the money your mother lent you? There are 3 options here because, okay, first of all, it's extra information about money, which is an object, so we use which. Second of all, there are no commas around it, so we can also use that. And lastly, there are no commas around it, but there is a new subject, your mother. Your mother is the person who was doing the lending. That means we can also leave it out. So in sentence 3, there are 3 correct answers, which, that, and leaving it out. Having said all that, that was all the theory that I was going to tell you about relative pronouns today. And we've already practiced a little bit as well. But of course, your teacher was kind enough to give you some extra assignments about this to really, really practice this, because just these 3 sentences is, of course, not enough. All right, have fun practicing, and I'll see you around.